The sterile scent of antiseptic was the first thing to cut through the fog. Then, the rhythmic, desperate beeping of a machine that felt far too close. My hand instinctively went to my stomach, a place of secret joy and newfound terror. The last thing I remembered was the world tilting, the sharp crack of my head against the cool marble floor of my empty kitchen, and a single, whispered name: Ethan. Now, a doctor's grave voice was filtering through, words like placental abruption and critical hanging in the air like poison. They were looking for my emergency contact, the man who had promised me forever and then left me for a life of glittering emptiness. They didn't know he was on a private jet, halfway across the world with her, blissfully unaware that the future he'd discarded was now fighting for its life. The life Olivia Parker had built in the 6 months since the divorce was a fragile fortress of routine. Yoga at dawn, a thriving freelance graphic design business run from her sun-drenched home office, and weekly dinners with her sister, Maya. It was a quiet life, a deliberate life, constructed brick by brick over the rubble Ethan Hayes had left behind. Each organized spice rack and alphabetized bookshelf was a testament to her survival, a silent rebellion against the chaos he had wrought. This morning had been different. A wave of nausea, more aggressive than the usual morning sickness, had sent her reeling. She'd dismissed it as a 3rd trimester milestone, another joyful misery of the secret she was nurturing. The secret was a tiny, fluttering life that was hers and hers alone. She had discovered her pregnancy a week after the divorce papers were signed, a cruel twist of fate's knife. Telling Ethan had never been an option. He had made his choice clear, trading their shared dreams for stock options and the affections of a woman whose ambition mirrored his own. Chloe Sterling. The name still tasted like ash in Olivia's mouth. Their life together had once been the envy of their circle. Ethan, the charismatic tech mogul, and Olivia, his creative, grounding force. They'd been a team, building his empire from a garage startup to a skyscraper reality. She remembered the late nights, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared belief in the future. He'd promised her, his hand on her then flat stomach in the early days of their marriage, "Liv, everything I build for us, for our family." That promise now echoed in the cavernous emptiness of the house they had designed together, a house she'd only managed to keep by liquidating every asset that had been solely hers. The pain started as a dull ache in her lower back as she was making tea. She'd leaned against the cool marble of the kitchen island, taking deep breaths, trying to ride it out. But the ache had sharpened, coiling into a vicious cramp that stole her breath and sent a bolt of pure terror through her. She'd seen the bloom of crimson on the inside of her thigh, a stark, terrifying contrast to the white linen of her dress. That's when the world had gone sideways. The beeping in the hospital room was the metronome of her new reality. Her fortress had been breached, not by memories of Ethan, but by the terrifying possibility of losing the one thing that was entirely hers. A nurse with kind, worried eyes was holding her hand, her voice a soothing balm over the sharp edges of Olivia's fear. "We've contacted your sister, Olivia. She's on her way. Is there anyone else?" The baby's father. Olivia's throat felt thick with unshed tears. She thought of Ethan, imagining him on a yacht in the Mediterranean, Chloe draped over his arm, the sun glinting off their champagne glasses. He was living a life scrubbed clean of her, of their shared history. He was a ghost, a memory, and a ghost couldn't save them now. She shook her head, the small movement taking an enormous effort. "No," she whispered, the word a ragged, painful thing. There's no one else. The Maldives were Ethan Hayes' personal paradise, a place where the turquoise water met the sky in a seamless, brilliant blue. It was the perfect backdrop for the life he was curating. Here, nestled in an overwater bungalow, with floor-to-ceiling windows, the messy, emotional debris of his past life felt 1,000,000 miles away. His phone, a sleek testament to the very technology his company had pioneered, buzzed on the glass table beside a half-empty bottle of Cristal. He glanced at the screen. Maya Cellular. He swiped to decline without a second thought. Another call from the ghost of marriage past? Chloe asked, her voice a low purr. She emerged from the bedroom, tying the silk sash of a robe around her impossibly toned waist. She was everything his first wife wasn't: sharp, ambitious, and utterly unsentimental. She understood his world, because it was her world, too. They'd met at a tech conference in Berlin, a meeting of minds and ambitions that had quickly escalated into a clandestine affair. Something like that, Ethan muttered, turning his attention back to the ocean. Probably wants to argue about the art appraisal again. The divorce had been acrimonious, a battlefield of assets and accusations. Olivia's sister had been her fiercest soldier, her emails and voicemails dripping with a self-righteous fury that Ethan found tiresome. "Let her," Chloe said, sliding onto the lounge chair beside him. She picked up a financial report from the table. "We should be focused on the Tokyo expansion. The board is getting nervous." This was why he was with her. Chloe never looked back. Her gaze was always fixed on the next acquisition, the next victory. She was a reflection of the man he wanted to be, the man he had become, the man who had outgrown the quiet, sentimental life Olivia had wanted. He'd told himself it was a mercy, setting her free to find someone who could appreciate her watercolors and her desire for a quiet life in the suburbs. He was built for the stratosphere. His phone buzzed again, this time a text message. "Ethan, it's Maya. It's Olivia. She's in the hospital. It's serious. Call me." He stared at the words, an unwelcome prickle of unease disturbing the perfect tranquility of the afternoon. Serious? Olivia was never serious. She had allergies and a penchant for melodrama, but she was strong, healthy. "What is it?" Chloe asked, noticing the shift in his demeanor. "It's nothing," he said, tossing the phone back on the table. Her sister, being dramatic. But the words felt hollow. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Olivia, laughing, her face smeared with flour as they tried to bake a cake from scratch in their first tiny apartment. The simple, uncomplicated joy of it. He pushed the memory away. He had traded that life for this, for the infinity pool and the billion-dollar valuations. He had made his choice. The final message came not from Maya, but from Mark, his old college roommate and one of the few friends who had tried to remain neutral after the divorce. It was a link to a news alert from a local business journal. The headline made the air freeze in his lungs. Ex-wife of tech mogul Ethan Hayes in critical condition after household accident. The article was short, speculative, but it contained a detail that the other messages had not. A detail that shattered the calm of his curated paradise and sent a shard of ice straight into his heart. It mentioned that Olivia was pregnant. Pregnant. The word seemed to hang in the air, mocking him. He did the math, his mind racing. The timing was possible. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle over him. This wasn't drama. This was a reckoning. Guilt was not an emotion Ethan Hayes was familiar with. In the cutthroat world of venture capital and tech innovation, guilt was a liability, a dead weight that slowed you down. He operated on a diet of logic, risk assessment, and forward momentum. Yet, as he stared at the headline on his phone, a strange, corrosive feeling began to eat away at the edges of his composure. "Pregnant? What is it, Ethan? You look like you've seen a ghost," Chloe said, her voice edged with impatience. She peered at his screen, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together. "Pregnant? Is this some kind of joke?" "I don't know," Ethan said, his own voice sounding distant and foreign. He stood up and walked to the edge of the deck, the warm, tropical breeze suddenly feeling cold against his skin. He had built a fortress around himself, not of routine like Olivia, but of success and distraction. A fortress of new cities, new deals, new bodies. He had told himself that their divorce was a mutual, if painful, evolution. They had simply grown into different people. He'd wanted the world. She'd wanted a home. It had seemed so simple, so logical, but the word pregnant complicated everything. It recontextualized every angry email from Maya, every sad, distant look from Olivia in the lawyer's office. Had she known then? Was she trying to tell him? He scrolled through his call logs, his texts, missed calls from her, weeks ago, that he'd ignored, assuming they were about some divorce-related logistics he'd delegated to his attorneys. What had he missed? What had he refused to see? A memory, sharp and vivid, pierced through the fog of his denial. It was from their last anniversary together, before Chloe, before the lies. They were in Napa. Olivia had been vibrant, happy. She'd raised a glass of wine, her eyes sparkling. "To us," she'd said, "and to the future, whatever it holds." He remembered his own toast, something about market shares and IPOs. He remembered the way the light in her eyes had dimmed, just for a second. He had been speaking a different language for a long time. "Well, if it's true, it's not your problem," Chloe said, coming to stand behind him. Her hand on his back felt alien, intrusive. "She's your ex-wife. Her choices are her own." Her logic was impeccable. It was the same logic he had used to justify the affair, to justify leaving. It was the logic of a clean slate, of personal responsibility, but it offered no comfort now. The image of Olivia, alone and pregnant in a hospital, began to take root in his mind. The woman who had been his partner, his confidant, the person who knew he sang off-key in the shower and was terrified of thunderstorms. He had erased her, and in doing so, he felt a dawning horror that he might have erased the best part of himself. "I have to go back," he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. Chloe's reaction was swift and sharp. "Go back? For what? Ethan, this is exactly the kind of mess you left behind. She's trying to trap you, can't you see that? The timing is a little too perfect." "Trap me?" he shot back, a flicker of his old anger rising. "The article says she had an accident. She's in critical condition. This isn't some calculated move, Chloe. This is real." He looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the cold calculation in her eyes, the immediate pivot to damage control, and for the first time, he saw the stark difference between the woman who had shared his past and the woman who was supposed to be his future. One was fighting for a life that might be connected to him, and the other was worried about the disruption to their schedule. The weight of that realization was crushing. It wasn't just guilt he was feeling. It was the cold, terrifying premonition that he had made a catastrophic mistake. The flight back to San Francisco was a 14-hour descent into a personal hell. The luxurious first-class cabin of the commercial flight, the private jet was unavailable for a last-minute international trip, felt like a gilded cage. Ethan had left Chloe in the Maldives, their parting a clipped, icy affair. She'd accused him of being sentimental, of being weak. "You're letting her win," she'd hissed as he packed a small bag. He hadn't bothered to argue. He didn't know what he was doing, only that staying had become impossible. With every hour that passed, the physical distance between him and Olivia shrank, while the emotional chasm seemed to widen. He was flying towards a life he had systematically dismantled, and he had no idea what he would find. He'd finally called Maya from the airport in Malé. The conversation was brutal. Her voice was a low, serrated blade, cutting through his apologies and explanations with cold, precise fury. "You don't get to be concerned now, Ethan. Where were you when she was throwing up every morning, so tired she could barely stand? Where were you when she had to go to her first ultrasound alone?" Every question was an indictment. He had no answers. He hadn't even known there were questions to be asked. He'd learned that Olivia was 28 weeks pregnant, that the fall had caused a partial placental abruption, that both she and the baby were in a precarious, touch-and-go state. His baby. The words felt unreal, a plot point from a movie, not the sudden, terrifying reality of his life. He tried to work, opening his laptop to review the Tokyo expansion proposal, but the numbers and projections were meaningless symbols. His mind was a chaotic reel of unanswered questions. Why hadn't she told him? Pride? Fear? A desire to protect the child from him? The thought was a punch to the gut. Had he become a man his own wife, his ex-wife, would shield her child from? He remembered how they'd talked about children. Olivia had wanted a big family, a noisy house filled with laughter. He had wanted to wait until the company was stable, wait until they hit the first billion, wait until the next milestone, always the next milestone. He had been so busy building an empire for a hypothetical family that he had completely neglected the woman who was supposed to be at its center. His phone vibrated with incoming messages. Some were from his board, concerned about the news leak and the potential PR fallout. Mogul abandons pregnant ex-wife was not a good look. Others were from Chloe, a stream of increasingly manipulative texts, alternating between feigned concern and accusations. "I just worry about you, darling. Don't let them manipulate you." But the most gut-wrenching were the messages from old, forgotten numbers, friends they had shared as a couple, people who had been at their wedding. Their messages were hesitant, full of cautious sympathy, but the subtext was clear. How could you? He had managed to insulate himself from their judgment, but now, trapped at 30,000 feet, there was nowhere to hide. The man in the reflection of the dark cabin window was a stranger. His tailored suit felt like a costume, his confident posture a sham. He was a fraud, a man who had sold his soul for a view from the top, only to realize how utterly alone he was. The turbulence that shook the plane was nothing compared to the storm raging inside him. The hospital was a maze of hushed corridors and the pervasive smell of disinfectant, a world away from the sleek glass and chrome of his office. Ethan felt profoundly out of place, his expensive leather shoes squeaking on the linoleum floors. He found the ICU waiting room and saw Maya immediately. She was pacing, her face pale and strained, a paper cup of coffee clenched in her hand. The moment she saw him, her expression hardened into a mask of pure contempt. "You actually came," she said, her voice dripping with venom. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. "Maya, I came as soon as I heard," he started, his voice sounding weak, inadequate. "As soon as you heard, I called you, Ethan. I called you 10 times. You were too busy, weren't you? Too busy with your new life, your new woman, to pick up the phone for the woman who gave up her own career to help you build yours." She didn't shout. Her voice was a low, controlled tremor of rage that was far more terrifying. She could have died, Ethan. She almost did. She was lying on that floor for who knows how long before a neighbor saw her through the window. Every word was a physical blow. He had nothing to say, no defense to offer. He had been sunning himself in paradise while Olivia was bleeding on their kitchen floor. The shame was a physical thing, hot and suffocating. "How is she?" he finally managed to ask. "She's stable. For now," Maya said, her gaze unwavering. "The baby, they're not sure. Every hour is critical." She gestured down the hall. "She's in there. You can see her. But if you upset her, if you cause her any stress at all, I will personally throw you out of this hospital." He walked to the room she indicated, his heart pounding against his ribs. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dim, filled with the quiet hum and beep of medical equipment, and in the bed she lay so still she was almost unrecognizable. Olivia. Her face was pale, her vibrant energy completely extinguished. An IV was taped to her hand, tubes and wires connecting her to the machines that were keeping her and their child alive. Her stomach, which he had last seen flat, was now a swollen, pronounced curve under the thin hospital blanket. The sight of it, the undeniable proof of the life he had co-created and then abandoned, broke something inside him. This was not a problem to be managed. This was not a PR crisis to be handled. This was a woman he had once loved, the mother of his child, lying broken in a hospital bed because of his carelessness, his selfishness. He stood there for a long time, the silence of the room amplifying the frantic, self-loathing voice in his head. The doctor came in, a woman with a kind but weary face. She introduced herself and gave him the clinical, devastating summary. High risk, bed rest for the foreseeable future, a very real chance of premature delivery. A long road ahead. He listened, nodding, but his eyes never left Olivia's face. He had been running for so long, chasing a future he thought he wanted, and all along, the most important thing in the world had been growing, quietly, without him. He had not just missed the calls. He had missed everything. Olivia woke up to the world in fragments, a sliver of light under the door, the scratchy feel of the hospital blanket, the dull, persistent ache in her abdomen, and then a sound that didn't belong, the quiet, steady breathing of someone sitting in the chair in the corner of her room. Her eyes fluttered open, slowly adjusting to the dim light. And she saw him, Ethan. He wasn't the slick, confident CEO from the magazines. He was disheveled, his suit jacket slung over the back of the chair, his tie loosened. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was staring at his hands as if he'd never seen them before. For a heart-stopping moment, the past 6 months melted away, and a wave of instinctual, foolish relief washed over her. Ethan is here. Everything will be okay. But then reality came crashing back. The betrayal, the divorce, Chloe, the lonely nights and the terrifying fall. The relief curdled into a cold, hard knot of anger. This man was a stranger, a visitor from a past life. He had no right to be here, in her room, breathing her air. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was a dry rasp, but it cut through the silence like a whip. Ethan's head snapped up. His eyes, when they met hers, were filled with a chaotic mix of emotions she couldn't decipher. Guilt, fear, and something else. Something that looked like desperation. "Liv, you're awake." He stood up, taking a hesitant step towards the bed. "Don't," she said, her voice gaining strength. She pushed herself up slightly, a protective hand automatically going to her stomach. The movement sent a sharp pain through her, but she ignored it. "I asked you a question. Maya called me. I came as soon as I could," he said, his words clumsy. "She shouldn't have," Olivia said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "This has nothing to do with you." His face crumpled. "Nothing to do with me?" "Liv, the doctor told me. About the baby. Our baby. The word our was a lit match on a trail of gasoline. There is no our, she snapped, her voice trembling with a fury she hadn't known she possessed. Our ended the day you walked out that door. This is my baby. I am the one who has been going to doctor's appointments alone. I am the one who has been fighting to keep this child safe. You don't get to swoop in here with your guilty conscience and claim any part of this. This was a different Olivia than the one he had left. The woman he'd known would have been crying, pleading, asking him how he could do this to them. This woman was forged of steel and ice. Her pain had not broken her. It had sharpened her. She had built a life without him, and she was fiercely protective of it and the new life inside her. I know I messed up, Liv. God, I know, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I was a fool, an arrogant, selfish fool. But I'm here now. I want to help. I want to be a father. Olivia almost laughed. The sound was bitter, humorless. You want to be a father? It's a little late for that, Ethan. A father doesn't disappear for 6 months. A father doesn't ignore calls from the mother of his child. You don't want to be a father. You want absolution. And you will not find it here. I want you to leave. The finality in her voice was absolute. She turned her head away from him, staring at the blank wall, making it clear that the conversation was over. He had come expecting tears and recriminations. He had not expected this unbreakable wall of strength. He had not expected to be so completely and utterly shut out. Ethan left the hospital that day, feeling like a man hollowed out. Olivia's cold dismissal had been more painful than any screaming match. It was a reflection of his own irrelevance, a mirror showing him the man he had become, a ghost in the lives of the people who should have mattered most. He checked into a sterile, impersonal hotel suite, a place that felt fitting for his current state of limbo. The call started almost immediately. His world, the one he had so carefully constructed, was beginning to fracture under the weight of his reality. His board of directors, once placated by his decisive leadership, were now demanding answers. The story had evolved from a minor news brief to a full-blown scandal. The narrative was writing itself. Heartless tech billionaire abandons his pregnant ex-wife to jet off with his mistress, only returning when she's at death's door. It was a PR nightmare, and it was threatening to derail the Tokyo expansion, the crowning achievement of his career. His carefully crafted image was shattering. Then there were the calls from Chloe. Her initial tone of feigned concern had quickly evaporated, replaced by a whining, accusatory barrage. How long are you going to stay there, Ethan? This is ridiculous. You're letting her control you. Your company is suffering. We're suffering. Her use of the word we grated on him. There was no we. There was just his mess, a mess she had no interest in understanding, only in how it affected her. She spoke of the bad press as if it were a temporary stock dip, not the fallout from a profound moral failure. He was trapped between two worlds. The cold, sterile reality of the hospital, where life and death were measured in heartbeats and fluid ounces, and the artificial, high-stakes world of his business, where everything was measured in dollars and public perception. The latter, which had once been his entire universe, now seemed trivial, almost absurd. Who cared about market penetration in Asia when his child's life was hanging in the balance? He spent his days in the uncomfortable chair in Olivia's hospital room. He didn't speak to her unless spoken to, respecting her demand for space. He simply sat, a silent, grim-faced sentinel. He watched the nurses check her vitals. He listened to the steady rhythm of the fetal heart monitor, a sound that was both a comfort and a constant, painful reminder of his absence. He became a fixture, a ghost haunting the edges of her recovery. Maya still treated him with icy disdain, but she no longer barred him from the room. She saw something in his eyes, perhaps a flicker of genuine remorse that went beyond saving his own reputation. One afternoon, his phone buzzed. It was Chloe again. He ignored it. It buzzed again. An angry text followed. "Are you ever coming back, or should I just move on with my life?" He stared at the message. The life she was talking about. The yachts, the galas, the endless, hollow pursuit of more. Felt like a dream he was waking up from. Without a second thought, he typed back a single sentence. "Move on." He blocked her number, severing the final tie to the man he had been just a week ago. It wasn't a grand gesture. It felt less like a choice, and more like a simple, inevitable shedding of a skin that no longer fit. He was alone, adrift, with only the steady, rhythmic beeping from the hospital machines to anchor him. As the weeks crawled by, Olivia's condition stabilized. The immediate danger passed, replaced by the monotonous, grueling reality of long-term hospital bed rest. The threat of premature labor was a constant shadow, but with each passing day, the baby grew stronger, and in the quiet, sterile space of her room, a strange, unspoken truce began to form between her and Ethan. He was relentlessly, painfully present. He wasn't the charming, persuasive Ethan of their past. He was quiet, observant, and oddly helpful. He learned the nurses' schedules. He knew which cafeteria food was edible. He started bringing her things she didn't have to ask for. A better pillow, her favorite brand of herbal tea, a stack of books by authors he remembered her loving. They were small, almost insignificant gestures, but they were consistent. They were the actions of someone who was paying attention. The conversation they needed to have came one rainy Tuesday afternoon. The mood in the room was somber, the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window, the only sound. Olivia had been watching him, a thoughtful, calculating look in her eyes. "We need to talk about the future," she said, her voice calm and clear. Ethan put down the magazine he'd been pretending to read. "Okay, this baby is coming," she said, stating the obvious. "And when it does, I will be its mother. The question is, what will you be?" This was it. Not a reconciliation, but a negotiation. The terms of his surrender, or perhaps his enlistment. "I want to be its father, Liv," he said, his voice raw with an earnestness he hadn't felt in years. "I know I have no right to ask for that. But I want to be there. I'll do whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes?" she asked, one eyebrow raised. The old Olivia, the one who had believed his grand promises, was gone. This Olivia dealt in specifics. "That's easy to say now. What about when there's a new product launch in Shanghai or a conference in London? What happens when this baby is no longer a crisis, but just a part of life?" "It will be my priority," he said, meeting her gaze. "My number one priority. I'm making changes at the company, stepping back from day-to-day operations, delegating. I've already started." She was silent for a moment, processing this. "I'm not moving back into that house, Ethan. It's too big, too full of ghosts. I'm going to sell it and find a small place near Maya." He nodded immediately. "Okay. Whatever you need. I'll help with the sale. I'll help you find a new place. I'll pay for it. I'll pay for everything. Child support, medical bills, education. That's a given." "I don't want your money," she said, a flash of her old pride returning. "I want your consistency. I want to know that if this child has a soccer game on a Tuesday afternoon, you'll be there. Not your assistant, not a check, but you. Can you promise me that?" Her eyes bored into his, searching for the truth. She was asking him to trade his empire for a PTA meeting, his global travel for a school play. She was asking him to choose a small life, the very life he had run from. He thought of the hollow victories, the empty hotel suites, the woman who had valued his net worth over his character. He looked at Olivia, at the fierce, protective mother she had already become, and the choice was surprisingly, breathtakingly simple. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can promise you that." It was not the passionate promise of a lover, but the solemn vow of a man who had finally understood what was truly valuable. True to his word, Ethan began to dismantle his old life and build a new one centered around a future he was only just beginning to earn. He put his penthouse on the market. He promoted his second-in-command to CEO, taking on a quieter, advisory role as chairman of the board. His days were no longer filled with back-to-back meetings and international calls, but with the quiet rhythms of the hospital. He became an expert in Olivia's care. He learned to read the fetal monitor strips, understanding the subtle dips and accelerations. He quizzed the doctors, his sharp mind now focused not on market trends, but on neonatal development and the risks of prematurity. He was not just present, he was engaged, an active participant in the fight for their child's health. Olivia watched him, her skepticism slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to thaw. She saw him on the phone with a realtor, patiently describing the kind of neighborhood she would like. Good schools, a park nearby, quiet streets. She saw him poring over consumer reports for the safest car seats and strollers. He wasn't throwing money at the problem, he was investing his time, his attention. One evening, a wave of pain, sharper and more intense than usual, seized her. Panic flared in her eyes. Before she could even press the call button, Ethan was there, his hand on her arm, his voice calm and steady. "Breathe, Liv. Just breathe with me. In for 4, out for 4. He coached her through it, his voice a low, reassuring anchor in the storm of her fear. The contraction passed. The nurses came and confirmed it was just a false alarm. But in that moment, something had shifted. For the first time in almost a year, she hadn't felt completely alone. He started talking about the baby, not as a hypothetical, but as a person. "Do you think he'll have your eyes?" he asked quietly one afternoon. "What makes you think it's a he?" she replied, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "I don't know, a feeling." He smiled back, a genuine, tired smile that reached his eyes. "If it's a girl, I hope she has your laugh." They began to talk, really talk, in the long, quiet hours. Not about the past, not about the betrayal. That was a wound too deep to touch just yet. They talked about neutral things, books, movies, news from the outside world. He told her about the absurdities of his board meetings, and she told him about the funny freelance projects she'd been working on before the fall. They were rebuilding a bridge, plank by fragile plank, across the chasm that had separated them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something like acceptance, an acceptance of their new, complicated reality. She was beginning to see not the man who had left, but the man who had come back. A man who was humbled, changed, and trying with every quiet gesture to be the person their child would need him to be. The ice around her heart hadn't melted, but it was beginning to crack. The confrontation, when it came, was not something Ethan could have ever prepared for. He was returning to Olivia's room with 2 cups of the herbal tea she liked when he saw a figure standing outside her door, arguing in a hushed, furious tone with Maya. It was Chloe. She looked jarringly out of place in the muted hospital corridor, dressed in a sharp, expensive suit, her hair perfectly styled. She was a spectre from his past, a life he no longer recognized as his own. "Has a right to know what's going on," Chloe was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "He's still a majority shareholder. This affects everything. The only thing that affects him right now is in that room," Maya shot back, her body physically blocking the doorway. "And you are the last person she needs to see." "Ethan?" Chloe's eyes landed on him, and a look of relief washed over her face. "Ethan, thank God. Tell your attack dog of a sister-in-law to let me pass. We need to talk." All the air seemed to leave the hallway. Ethan felt Olivia's gaze on him from inside the room. The door was slightly ajar. This was a test. He walked forward, placing himself between Chloe and Maya, his back to Olivia's door. "There's nothing to talk about, Chloe," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But nothing to talk about?" she scoffed, her voice rising. "You've tanked the stock price, you've abandoned the Tokyo deal, and you're hiding out in a hospital playing nursemaid to the woman you couldn't wait to get away from. Do you have any idea what this is doing to your reputation?" "To our reputation? I don't care about my reputation," he said, and the truth of the statement surprised even him. "And there is no our. I told you that." "Because of her," Chloe gestured wildly at the door. "Because she trapped you with this baby. Ethan, wake up. This is what she's wanted all along. To ruin you, to drag you back into her sad little life." He looked at this woman, this sharp, beautiful, ambitious woman he had once thought was his future, and he felt nothing but a profound, weary pity. She would never understand. She couldn't see past the balance sheets and the public image to the real, fragile, important thing that was happening here. "You're wrong," he said simply. "She didn't trap me. She set me free. Now, I need you to leave. Don't come back. Don't call my office. We're done." Tears of rage and frustration welled in Chloe's eyes. "You will regret this, Ethan Hayes," she spat, her voice trembling. "You're throwing everything away for nothing." She turned on her heel and stormed down the hallway, the sharp click of her heels echoing her defeat. Ethan stood there for a moment, the 2 teacups growing cold in his hands. He took a deep breath and turned to face Maya, who was looking at him with a new, grudging respect. He pushed open Olivia's door. She was sitting up, her expression unreadable. He had done it. He had chosen. He had finally, decisively, closed the door on his past. He had exorcised the last ghost. And in the quiet of the hospital room, he felt not a sense of loss for the empire he'd let go, but an overwhelming sense of peace. He was finally home. Their daughter was born on a crisp autumn morning, arriving 5 weeks early but screaming with a surprising, healthy fury. She had a full head of dark hair, like Ethan, and Olivia's determined, slightly furrowed brow. They named her Grace. The birth was a blur of controlled chaos, but through it all, Ethan was a steady presence by Olivia's side. He held her hand, he breathed with her, and when their daughter was finally placed in her arms, the look of pure, unadulterated love on his face was something Olivia would never forget. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by the fierce, overwhelming reality of this tiny, perfect person they had created. Bringing Grace home was both terrifying and wonderful. Olivia had found a small, 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, and Ethan had spent the weeks leading up to the birth getting it ready. He hadn't just written a check, he had assembled the crib himself, painted the nursery a soft, buttery yellow, and stocked the fridge with food. Their new life was a dance of co-parenting, a delicate, often clumsy, negotiation of roles and responsibilities. They were not a couple. Olivia was clear about that. Ethan slept in the spare room, but they were a team. He took the late-night feeding so she could sleep. She handled the daytime routine, while he worked from a small desk he'd set up in the corner of the living room. There were moments of friction, echoes of their old life. He would instinctively try to take charge, and she would push back, fiercely independent. But there were also moments of unexpected grace. Like the time Grace wouldn't stop crying, and Ethan, at his wits' end, started humming an old off-key lullaby he remembered from a movie. Grace quieted instantly, her wide eyes fixed on his face. Olivia watched from the doorway, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. This was their new reality. It wasn't the passionate romance of their youth, nor was it the bitter war of their divorce. It was something else entirely. Quieter. More mature. It was built not on grand promises, but on the shared, daily work of raising a child. It was two people, broken by their past, slowly, carefully, piecing together a future. A future centered not on themselves, but on the little girl who was the best part of both of them. Their reconciliation wasn't a dramatic reunion. It was a quiet, powerful understanding that grew in the space between diaper changes and 3 a.m. feedings. It was the silent acknowledgement that sometimes a second chance doesn't mean going back to what was, but building something new and stronger in its place. The first birthday party was a small affair. Just Olivia, Ethan, Maya, and a few close friends gathered in the sun-dappled backyard of Olivia's small house. Grace, with a smudge of pink frosting on her cheek, toddled unsteadily between her parents, a look of pure delight on her face. Ethan and Olivia moved around each other with an easy, practiced familiarity. They were partners in the truest sense of the word. He knew how she liked her coffee. She knew which projects he was stressed about at work. They shared inside jokes about their daughter's latest antics and debated nap schedules with the seriousness of world leaders discussing a treaty. Later, after the guests had gone and Grace was asleep inside, they sat on the back porch, watching the fireflies begin to blink in the twilight. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding of all they had been through. "You know," Olivia said softly, "this isn't the life I ever imagined for myself." Ethan looked at her, his expression open and sincere. "Me neither, but," she continued, a small smile playing on her lips, "it's a good life. A really good life." He reached out, not to touch her hand in a romantic gesture, but to gently squeeze her shoulder in a gesture of pure, platonic affection, of partnership. "It's the best," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. Their love story hadn't ended in a fiery crash. It had transformed. It had been dismantled down to its foundations and rebuilt into something different. A friendship forged in crisis, a family bound by a shared love for their child, and a quiet, powerful respect for the people they had become. They were not in love, but they were full of love. And as they sat there, watching the stars begin to appear, they both knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that this was their own unique and perfect kind of forever. This story is a reminder that our greatest mistakes don't have to define us, and that second chances often appear in the most unexpected ways. It's about finding strength in heartbreak and realizing that family isn't always what we plan, but what we build. If Olivia and Ethan's journey to redemption and co-parenting touched your heart, please give this video a like and comment your thoughts below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to change. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart.